Am I live now?
Yes.
I am?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's try this again. Let's see if it works. I'm gonna have to pray that this works, I guess. Thanks for being patient with me. Can you turn the hotspot on that phone?
Yeah.
Trying to conserve our computing resources and internet. It's working all right most of the time, but yeah. It's not on for my computer. Can you go in and... Okay, like I was saying before, if you go to that link up at the top, you can ask questions throughout. I encourage questions. No question is a bad question. So feel free to ask away. All right, we got our fabulous four back. So I'm going to go ahead and start just because I don't know how long we have until government shuts our stream down. It's obviously what's been happening. It's a conspiracy. No, that's not true at all. Don't believe that. But here we go, I guess. Well, actually, I need to wait for that internet because I'm controlling the slideshow with another computer so that the one that has the slideshow broadcasting doesn't freak out and die.
You should be able to get the Wi-Fi now.
It keeps just saying connecting. Is it on the page or on the settings?
No. I will go to the settings. It's on the settings.
Okay, so some of you are saying that the link that we shared wasn't clickable. So maybe I will have my wife post another link in the comments for the stream. The comments, yeah, for this stream in the comments on those times that you shared, you know, those 2 pages.
I shared it again on those 2 pages, this one.
Oh, okay, perfect. All right, so let's see, what are we looking at here? We're looking at 4. Let's go ahead and get started. So this is a presentation on the linguistic, historical, and cultural context of the Book of Mormon. It's, I guess, an approach to looking at the Book of Mormon that's a little bit different. So it's not necessarily exclusively from a non-secular point of view, but I think that you'll find that the secular approach, I mean, somewhat secular approach that I take, will support the non-secular, faith-based side of things. And I have a couple quotes here at the beginning that I would like to share with you. So the first is from Elder Holland. This is a quote from the August 16th, 2017 Chiasmus Jubilee. It was the 50-year anniversary of the discovery of the chiasmus literary pattern in the Book of Mormon. He said, "Truly rock-ribbed faith and uncompromised conviction comes with its most complete power when it engages our head as well as our heart." And that is true in every way. He went on to say, "Our testimonies aren't dependent on evidence. We still need always, and he's referring to physical evidence. The Spirit provides evidence for us in our hearts, but our testimonies are dependent on physical, secular evidence. We still need, always and forever, that spiritual confirmation in the heart, but not to seek for and not to acknowledge intellectual, documentable support for our belief when it is available is to needlessly limit an otherwise incomparably strong theological position and deny us a unique, persuasive vocabulary in the latter-day arena of religious investigation and sectarian debate. That's a bit of a mouthful, but if you dissect that, it's amazing what it says and what it means. And Neil A. Maxwell once quoted a philosopher, Austin Farrer, I believe it's pronounced. I don't know. He quoted the philosopher saying, "Though argument does not create conviction, the lack of it destroys belief. What seems to be proved may not be embraced, but when no one shows the ability to defend, is quickly abandoned. Rational argument does not create belief, but it maintains a climate in which belief may flourish." And I've seen that be the case in multiple settings and situations. Argument and defense of faith does not create conviction, but it creates a climate that is conducive to, I guess, growing faith. So where we start in this presentation is we're going to start with the Old World. And what I mean by the Old World is I mean not North and South America. I mean the Near East. So Israel, the Arabian Peninsula, that area. And we're going to go from their home in Jerusalem, the Lehite party. We're going to go from their home in Jerusalem to Bountiful. Not the Bountiful in the New World, but the Bountiful in the Old World. Before we do, though, I need to kind of explain and give you a little, I guess, mini, Arabic and Hebrew and Middle Eastern language lesson. So Semitic linguistics, that's the languages that the Semitic peoples, which are Arabs, Israelites, Egyptians. I got a couple languages listed here, Arabic, Hebrew, Ugaritic, and Ugaritic is actually the language they spoke in Babylon. And then Amharic is Ethiopian. It's a really weird script. It looks like a little alien language, but look up Amharic and you'll find something kind of cool. Phoenician, that is also a Semitic language. And these are all, the importance of them all being Semitic languages, and Semitic comes from Shem, Shemitic, the descendants of Shem, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah. And so Shem, Shemitic, Semitic, that's what that means, I guess, or where that comes from. So all of these are Semitic peoples, and their grammar and roots are somewhat related. And so all of those, as well as Egyptian, and that's going to come in and be important later on. But here's an explanation, this little chart here of how it works. So typically there are 3 consonants, no vowels, that make up a root. And the 3 consonants are not a word in and of themselves. In this case, it's KTB, but they're kind of an idea through which words can be created. As you see here, there's a lot of words in this little red circle made up of the KTB consonants with vowels plugged in. And depending on which vowels you plug in where, you get a different word. But they all have to do with this notion of writing. And that's going to be important to understand as we look at some of the names of places, people, things, and how they spoke. So keep that in mind, that it's usually 3 consonant roots with vowels plugged in. Our first stop is at Beit Lehi. Beit means home. So this is home of Lehi, as we would say over here in America, I guess. But a more accurate pronunciation would actually be Lehi. And that's because it descends from Semitic linguistics. It's a Hebrew name. So this place, Beit Lehi, home of Lehi, it's basically what happened was in the 1960s, an Israeli military bulldozer kind of fell into this cavern, like a hole just opened up in the middle of the desert, and this bulldozer fell in. and it fell in, discovering a mass grave of sorts. Not like a scary, terrible mass grave, but like a graveyard. It was actually all these kind of like cubby holes. You'll see a picture of it later on the next slide, where they would put the remains of the people who had died. So it was a burial ground of sorts. And they not only saw and found this burial area, I guess, but it ended up being a whole city after they excavated a lot of it, and they discovered written on walls and things, and inscribed in the walls was Beit Lehi. It was named that, and they talked to a local Bedouin chieftain, so like a sheikh, one of the local leaders there, an Arab who lives in the area, probably Palestinian, I assume. And he told them that the reason why it was named Beit Lehi was because there was a prophet named Lehi, and he and his family lived there. And sometime around 600 BC, they disappeared. Yes, I know, oddly specific, and it can, at first glance, seem very constructed. Like, wow, isn't that convenient? Who is this chieftain, anyways? He probably doesn't exist, right? I just made that up. There's a guy who said it. Yeah, he said it. Trust me. Now, there's a video, and if you are interested in that video of them interviewing him, I can send you a link. Go ahead and send me a comment or comment on this video, and I will send it to you. So no worries. So the population, if I remember correctly, was about 15,000 people, and it was about 30 miles outside of Jerusalem. But some significance there to the secular world is that they found 7 inscriptions in Hebrew that they found 7 inscriptions of the words, and they didn't see the vowels because they don't write the vowels. They only write the consonants in their alphabet. They have little dots and lines that they put above and below their letters to indicate vowels, but they didn't always write those. You just had to know by context. So they found the words Yahweh and Yerushalayim, and they found them on the walls and inscribed. Now, the significance of this is that these are apparently, according to Joseph Nave at the Hebrew Institute, I think in Jerusalem there, the museum where they actually cut it out of the wall, and it's in their museum in Jerusalem. It's not an LDS museum. This is a significant find for the academic world, but they were dated to be from the late 6th century BC. And obviously this is, well within our time of the small exodus out of Jerusalem by the Lehite party, Lehi and his family. Here's some pictures of what I've described to you. You can see that Beit Lehi is well within, Jerusalem, the land of Jerusalem. And below that picture of the map, you can see the triangle cuts in the walls where the bodies and people were, I guess not the bodies, but the people who had died were placed and buried. On the right, though, it's very interesting because these are all the different features they found in Beit Lehi. And it's a town. They found, I guess if you notice in the top middle, it says they found a fig tree. That's a real big find for the academic world. We found it, finally, a fig tree. It mentioned in the scriptures, but we did it. Let's go home, folks. And apparently the village is right under that arrow where it says the village. No, the significance of the things they found was they found some really cool things. One of those being Samson's well, or at least what they believe to be Samson's well, because it is geographically where Samson's well is described to be. This is more towards the coast than Jerusalem, slightly. It's kind of down the mountains a little bit. And so we know that Samson came in contact with a lot of Philistines. And what is really fascinating is that Lehi, going back to this name, Lehi is the Hebrew word for jawbone. And if you know the story of Samson, you'll know that that's significant because he slew, 1,000 or 2,000? I forget if it was 1,000 or 2,000 Philistines with the jawbone of an ass. That's what it says. So the fact that he was named Lehi is not only symbolic in him being a prophet, but it's a local feature as well. It's something that attaches or connects him to where he's from. he's from the same area as Samson, and Samson's well is indicates that. So and this is very common in Hebrew naming. They'll give prophetic and meaningful symbolic names, and the name Lehi is both of those things. Now, if we look into the scriptures and the path they traveled after they left, we see that there are some geographical features that are mentioned in the Book of Mormon in First Nephi as they're, traveling in the wilderness, not yet too bountiful, but almost right after they leave Jerusalem, and as they're coming up to the Red Sea, they mention that there is the Valley of Lemuel with the River of Laman, and then there's Shazar, and then there's the possible area of the camp of Nephi's broken bow. And so these are interesting because there's not very many rivers, I tell you, around this area. And so they found one river in a valley, and it's got these steep walls just on both sides, and it feeds right into the Red Sea. It's one of the only ones that does. From that side, from the Arabian Peninsula, because there's not much water that comes off the Arabian Peninsula. So you imagine the River of Laman to be this big, great flowing river, right? Because of the reason why Lehi named the river after him. But it's actually this really kind of puny thing. But this area matches the descriptions given. It's pretty interesting. So if you go to those scriptures, and I can share this with you if you'd like to reference it later, but it's this point D. Yes, ... What is that? Well, that is what I find to be one of the most fascinating things, and that is a couple of altars. Now, they reached a place that they called Nahom, and up at the top I've got written in Arabic letters, Nun, Ha, and Mim. Nun, Ha, Mim. Now, these are some altars that were discovered to bear the inscriptions Nun Ha Mem. And this particular area, and I'm going to go back a slide real quick so you can see this. Right here is where these altars were found. Now, by the way, these are all along this yellow line here. This is called the Frankincense Trail. They would go down to Yemen and Oman area, what we would call Yemen and Oman now. And that's where they would get frankincense, and they would send it back up this trail for trade. And so this was a big merchant trail. Now, Lehi and his family said they didn't travel exactly on the trail, so this line over here is where they traveled most likely. The reason why this is significant is because they said they had to go back to the trails to get water because that's where the wells were. So along this frankincense trail, there are wells dug on, along the way. So that matches that description. But right here, this is a place that is really actually called Nahom. The people that live there call it Nahom. The Naham tribe has been located here since, apparently, according to tradition, it's been located there since around 10 after Christ's death, or after AD, Anno Domini, whatever it is. So in 1950, Hugh Nibley identified two possible interpretations for this name and what it means. And for Nun Ha Mim, found in Hebrew and Egyptian, it means, you're gonna roll over in your seat when you hear this. It translates to the idea of groaning, suffer of hunger, and complain. Yeah, all three of those things. That's the connotation behind this word, or this root, is to groan, to suffer of hunger, and complain. And that's exactly what what Laman and Lemuel did here. So I think that's definitely coincidence. There's nothing there. Nothing, that doesn't point to anything, not at all. There's just, altars that we found. It's literally written in stone. And I mean, I couldn't make this up. Now, if you change it a little bit, so you change the middle root to cha, which is a little different, you find that actually in the Bible in multiple places, in Genesis, 2 Samuel, and twice in Isaiah. Like I said, I can send all these references to you if you'd like. But Which, this is interesting as well because Nun Ha Mim means mourning someone else's death or consoling the bereaved. And so either one is just as likely because Nehom, or in this case, I guess it would be Nahom, would be the place where the Book of Mormon tells us that Ishmael was buried by his children. So it's not just mourning, mind you, it's mourning someone else's death. So a very fitting name. And we can learn how it was named in the Book of Mormon. Imagine that. Here's another really cool map. So I travel, and we're making our way down to Bountiful. Another cool fun fact is that there was a local prophet here in the Nahom area. He was most commonly in the traditions. It's said that he was living in the Hadramaut region of, I think it's Yemen. There was a prophet named Hud, and the stories about Hud in the Quran tell us that he suffered a very similar treatment and fate as Lehi and his family. Hud has sometimes been identified, though, with Eber, which is an ancestor of the Israelites. Abraham's, I think it's great-grandfather or something like that. That's where the word Hebrew, Eber, comes from. It comes from Eber. So that's quite fascinating, and I can give you the references to the Quran that talks about Hud and his travels if you'd like. Next, we reach Chod-Rafat, the land called Bountiful. Now, there are 12 requirements for us to identify accurately the land Bountiful. There are 12 very specific things that if we are to say that, a place is the land Bountiful, it has to have these 12 things. What are they? Well, one, it says that there was fresh water available year-round. And so these are pictures of Chod-Rafat, which is on the coast of the Arabian Peninsula, down in the farthest south and up into Yemen on the I guess if you go west, down on the bottom coast. These are pictures of that place. The dunes there are just inside that interior desert of the Arabian Peninsula, but once you reach the coast, and this is the only place all along that coast where there's any life, it seems, and it's just overflowing. It's bountiful, properly named. And I mean, generally speaking, between the desert and the ocean, water suitable for drinking was pretty scarce. So it's kind of miraculous that the Lord was able to, lead them to this place, and I'm sure it was prepared for them. They said that it had to contain much fruit and honey. Now, that picture on the left there is a fig tree, and those are the fruit growing off of it. But what you can't see is over here on this mountain ridge, there are hives of honeybees all up in there. It's kind of dangerous, I can imagine, to get down in there and get it out, but apparently they wanted honey bad enough. And I mean, Nephi spent a lot of time on the mountains, so maybe he picked some up on his way home. I don't know. But there's honey all in these ridges. It's fascinating. Let's see here. So the general area of Bountiful and the specific location where the Lehites were camped out had to be pretty fertile because they were there for a good bit. And this is a picture of the area to describe just how out of place this area is compared to the desert. Just the dead, and dying desert around it. It goes from nothing to everything all of a sudden. It's amazing to look at. Yeah. So another geographical, feature of the area is that there are really tall cliffs all around the edge of the Arabian Peninsula, especially all along that bottom coast. If you were to look at a map, and it would be very difficult to get down to the ocean, even if you went to the edge of the peninsula, and even if you went to the coast, getting down to the ocean itself, it's very difficult. But these are some maps that have been drawn out, and there are, in fact, a handful of places in the Khor Harfat area where they could, in fact, travel down these cliffs and make their way to the ocean. So that, this reasonable access is very important. Yeah. And obviously there had to be a mountain prominent enough, big enough for Nephi to call it the Mount. Ladies and gentlemen, the moment you've all been waiting for. This is the Mount. Yes, this is the Mount that Nephi. Well, I can't prove it, but I believe personally that it is. This is a mountain that very closely resembles the mountain where Nephi said he went to pray often. It kind of just sticks up above, much higher than anywhere else, any other hill or mountain in the area, and it's definitely the mountain there. So that's pretty cool. To know that this is a physical place where Nephi, a real person, went and prayed. Now here we have cliffs, possibly cliffs that Nephi could have been thrown into the sea from. Now, if I was a layman, I'm guessing that maybe I would have wanted to throw him off this one. But see, Lemuel, maybe he was a little bit more salty. I want to see him roll a bit. Either way, you throw somebody down both, they're not going to end up very well. And these are obviously places that must be at our bountiful for it to match the scriptural description. Now, the shoreline is important as well. Like I said, there's lots of cliffs, and even here you can see these mountain ridges and these cliffs, almost a plateau it looks like up there, very close in proximity to the ocean and the beach. But there had to be enough flat area for there to be a construction of a ship and the launching of that ship. And we have a picture here that shows an area that very possibly, it could very easily have been where they constructed their ship, because it's flat enough, and it would provide the access to the ocean so that they could get it into the ocean and actually use it. Next, we have the iron that Nephi used to make his tools. Here's a video. I'm going to play a little bit of it. This is iron ore. I don't know if anybody heard that, but let me try this again.
So did you find many of those ones?
No, I only found this one just lying in isolation.
So it's definitely iron ore. Yeah, it is. No question about that. But how extensive it is and where it is coming from, and
Whether it was brought in here from somewhere else.
Amount of mountain. And even if has fallen, it has not fallen from. I mean, it's not brought from too far. I mean,
With this,
Yeah, so obviously this is significant because he needed iron to make his tools. And I'll tell you what, there's not any other iron ore in that area at all, but you can go out on the beach apparently with a magnet and pick up all this just iron with the magnet. And it's just ridiculous. It's just right there in the sand. So for them to build a boat, they needed wood. Now you're going to have to just trust me on this one. This is in fact the picture of a tree located at Khorafat. I don't know how I can prove that there were trees there other than the pictures you've already seen, and I don't know how I found this one of just a tree's roots there. But this is the kind of trees that they had there. They weren't. I mean, I guess it's important to know that they weren't just skinny twigs. You could actually get some planks out of that, it looks like. So it would have been seaworthy. Yeah. Next, we need wind to carry our ship into the ocean and past the ocean or the waves and ocean currents that would take the ship out and take us somewhere. Well, the Arabian Peninsula here, the coast here in the Arabian Peninsula, definitely has enough wind. I chose this picture because, I mean, if you look, there's a bunch of clouds up there coming off the mountain, and you can kind of get the idea that, there's a lot of movement here in the wind. Yeah, it's interesting. The ocean currents here into the Indian Ocean, if you trace where they go, they actually lead to South America. No, I'm not saying anything, but I'm saying something. If you wanted to get to South America from the Arabian Peninsula, you could. It's interesting because we kind of, without realizing it, always assumed that the boat they had and rode to the promised land, we assumed that it landed on the east coast somewhere of either North or South America, but it's actually probably landed on the west coast. That's kind of an interesting thing, how we get these ideas that nobody ever really says, but we all just assume, they landed on the other side. So, yeah. Now, they said that there was nobody who had ever lived there prior to their arrival, and this is a picture of the lack of, archaeological remains, or rather the lack thereof. So there's really nobody. Nobody's left anything here. There's not been anybody that lived here, really, especially no civilizations or even cities or towns like Horhafat. So that matches the description. And it has to be nearly eastward of Nehom. Well, there's Nehom on the map, and that's east. So, Ripley's, believe it or not. Now we're going to get into the text itself a little bit, rather than the area that the Book of Mormon took place, at least in the Old World. And I want to explain the significance of the chiasmus. Most people in the church, I feel like, or at least a lot of people, maybe I'll go even further, a handful of people, have heard of, at least vaguely, what the chiasmus is. Now, the chiasmus is and I'm sure you can all read, it's a literary form in which words and whole thoughts and ideas are repeated after one idea. They're repeated in reverse, and they're usually repeated in a different way that adds clarity. And this is a poetic device. And what makes it poetic? See, in English, we make poetry by rhyming, right? True, blue, who, all, that's what we do. Well, in other languages that conjugate their verbs by adding suffixes, it's kind of difficult to create poetry that's interesting when all of your sentences rhyme. Japanese is like this. Hebrew is like this. If I were to say the plural of a noun, you're just your regular masculine noun. So like sus means horse. So susim would be horses. So if I said, I wanted to write poetry about horses and dogs, I would probably not write it by ending each sentence with susim klevim, because that's just too easy. So the way that they made poetry was by not, I guess, matching sounds, but matching ideas. And so we see the same sentiment reiterated on the other side of a chiasmus in a different way that adds clarity. And that's kind of an art form. Here are some examples of chiasmus in the Old Testament. See, this is an ancient form of writing. The Semitic peoples wrote with chiasmus as a way of prophecy as well. And so we see that in Psalms. Save me, O my God, for thou hast smitten all my enemies on the cheekbone, the teeth. So the cheekbone, the teeth, those are related, right? They're both in the mouth, kind of. Cheekbones kind of in the flesh there, but they're the same area, All my enemies, the wicked. For thou hast smitten, thou hast broken. My God, Jehovah, save me, salvation. And so we can understand what it means to be saved. Save me, to be saved is to receive salvation. Salvation is to be saved. It clarifies and teaches us and gives us understanding. In Isaiah, we see a very small chiasmus. We see, out of Zion shall go forth, and then the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Zion, Jerusalem, those are coordinated ideas, corresponding ideas, and law and word of the Lord. So the word of the Lord is the law. There we go. Now, I mentioned Elder Holland spoke at the 50th anniversary of the Chiasmus Jubilee. That was the, 50-year anniversary of the discovery of the chiasmus. Now, the chiasmus was discovered by John Welch, a young missionary in Germany in 1967. He was serving in Regensburg, Germany. And while serving there for almost a year later, he and his companion attended an academic lecture there at like a priest seminar or a priest seminary. And it was at that lecture that Welch first learned about this ancient type of, it's called inverted parallelism, and how it was commonly used in biblical Hebrew literature. He learned about the chiasmus. The lecturer made frequent reference to a book that he had recently read, published a year earlier by a certain Paul Gechter. And after the lecture, the elders stopped at the nearby bookstore and were able to pick up a copy of Gechter's book. And I don't know if they had the same rules back in the day, but it's a good thing that they did pick up the book, because during the next week, Welch reread the Gospel of Matthew, that was the book. The book was The Literary Art in the Gospel of Matthew. And so he reread the Gospel of Matthew alongside Gechter's study. And he learned that parallelism was important to the biblical authors because they often relied on oral transmission, and these literary patterns also helped them to memorize the text. And for Gechter, apparently the presence of chiasmus in Matthew was evidence that it was based on a Semitic original source. It was almost proof, if you will. Now, young Elder Welch, felt prompted to begin reading where he and his companion had left off the night before in the middle of King Benjamin's speech. And as he read on into Mosiah 5, he noticed in verse 11, and he's reading in German, so he noticed the German word for transgression appearing twice, one stacked directly on top of the other. Welch then found other parallel words and phrases repeated in the adjacent lines above and below. Ultimately, a chiastic pattern that stretched across Mosiah 5, 10 through 12, and you'll see that here. And it jumped out at him in a powerful way. Now, I want to clarify that we have not always known about the chiasmus. The chiasmus itself in any text had not been discovered until, I believe, the late 1800s, early 1900s, possibly even. You'll have to fact check me on that. But my point is that I know for a fact it was not known widely, or if at all discovered, before Joseph Smith published the Book of Mormon. Now, I want to encourage you to go pick up your Book of Mormon and go to any part and try and find a chiasmus, and within 5 minutes you'll find one. It's amazing. It's fascinating. There's so much chiasmus in the Book of Mormon that the entire outline of what happens in the first book of Nephi, it's itself a chiasmus. It starts with Lehi's dream, and it leads him to prophesy to the Jews. It ends with Nephi warning the Jews and quoting the prophecies of Isaiah. And it goes to the departure from Jerusalem, the departure from the old world. Nephi accomplishes a great feat. Nephi accomplishes another great feat in building the ship, rather than before he got the plates. Both situations, his brothers are confounded. So that matches. The brass plates, a source of spiritual guidance as they travel through the wilderness of this life. It's a spiritual guidance. The brass ball, the Liahona, physical guidance, both leading to the spiritual and physical promised lands. Ishmael joins the group with his daughters. The sons of Lehi marry the daughters of Ishmael, and Ishmael dies. I don't know what that Ishmael dies part has to do with it, but yeah, Ishmael and his family were involved there. The tree of life, is, I guess, the vision of the tree of life, Lehi's dream, is given, and then it's interpreted. And then Lehi prophesies about the old world and the coming of the Lamb, and Nephi prophesies about the new world and the coming of the Lamb. And then it all revolves around Nephi and the Spirit of the Lord in chapter 11. It's amazing. I don't know how, with knowing that this is there and it exists, how a testimony could ever, weaken in the roots of the Book of Mormon in the Old World. It's just almost undeniable. Now, I want to look at a record, and we've moved on into the New World. The Mayan Peninsula has the Caciquos and a few other native tribes there, the Mayans. And the Annals of the Caciquos is a book. It's a story. It's a history. And there's another book called Rabin Alachi. That's the word, Quiche, the Quiche Maya. The Rabin Alachi is from the Quiche Maya, I believe. Whereas the Annals of the Caciquos is that other tribe, the Caciquos tribe. Now, the Annals of the Caciquos tells a story of their ancestors. It says they came from a place called Bountiful, across the sea, and that they have a Bountiful here in the New World, on this side of the sea. And it's right next to a town called, guess, Earthquake. Yeah. That's cool, right? Bountiful. The temple was in Bountiful. That's where the earthquake happened. Everything kind of culminated before Christ came. I don't know. Okay, maybe it's a stretch, but it's kind of interesting, maybe. But the Mayan, the Quiche Maya tradition of Rabin al-Achi is about a warrior in conquest who travels through, yep, you guessed it, Earthquake. My favorite city, Earthquake. But Brother Carter, is that really true? Is it Earthquake? What does that matter? No, it was actually called Bountiful. It's not called Earthquake. He travels through a town called Bountiful. Couldn't make it up. So here's some random cool stuff. It's just really interesting. In the 1920s in San Salvador, El Salvador, they found these two archaeologists, or I don't even know if they were archaeologists, excuse me, I'll take that back. People found these two dolls that are very obviously, if you look at them, Egyptian figurines. But they're not just any Egyptian figurines. They are specifically Ushabti dolls. Now, Ushabti dolls were placed in the tombs among all the goods that were in the grave and were intended to act as servants or minions for the deceased. They should be called upon to do manual labor in the afterlife if the people so need it. Well, the figurines frequently carried like a hoe in their shoulder and a basket on their backs, implying that they were intended to farm for the person who died and give them food. But this one here, actually, and it's verified, this right here is an excerpt from the Book of Breathings, which is, I guess we call that the Book of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Its more proper name is the Book of Breathings, but right there, and they found it in El Salvador. So I think Nephi and Lehi and everybody brought it over. I don't know if this means anything at all, but it's cool. You can look into it if you'd like. So flipping through the book, we have what's called a colophon. Now, everybody says, I wrote this record by my hand, I'm the one who's doing this, and I've been raised by good parents and all these different things. Well, that's actually a very specific pattern of ancient Near Eastern copywriting. They didn't have the ability to enforce, who could and couldn't copy their works and change whatever was in it. And so writers like John the Beloved in his Revelation, people love to quote this, that no one should add or take away lest plagues and curses come upon them. And that was a colophon to encourage people to not change anything at all if they're going to copy this, because he can't control that after he's gone. He can't control whether or not somebody changes it and puts whatever they said and says, yeah, John said that. And so what do? We get all the heebie-jeebies, and we throw them at people and we say, you're going to get plagues, you're going to get curses if you do. and people get freaked out and they don't copy it with whatever they want to put in it. And this is a real thing. It's found in many ancient documents, and it's here's a document specifically. It's called the Bremer Rind Papyrus. And it's funny because the guy actually who wrote this papyrus, apparently he ran out of room. So at the end, when he was saying, "Oh yeah, and plagues and curses if you change anything," he had to write it in the spaces going the other direction, kind of perpendicular to the way he wrote the first time. But colophones oftentimes had a record of a genealogy, told you who they were, why this record is important, and yeah. Now, this is the Anton manuscript. So Charles Anton was a fellow. He was an academic in, I believe, New York, that Martin Harris was permitted to take written on a piece of paper. Joseph Smith wrote a bunch of these characters, apparently from the gold plates. He wrote them down on this piece of paper because Martin Harris said, "My wife, she's getting on me. I gotta have some sort of proof." And he says, "Fine, Martin, here." And he scribbles these down real quick. Very good spelling here at the top. It says characters with a C, no H. So, the literary genius of Joseph Smith. He definitely wasn't illiterate. He wrote these down and he took them to Martin Anton took them to, Martin Harris took them to Charles Anton, the academic, and said, "Can you read this?" And he says, "Where did you get this? What is this?" He says, "Yeah, this is what. Where did you get this? This is a sort of shorthand Egyptian, it looks like." And he says, "Shorthand Egyptian, eh? Well, I got this from a prophet of God who's translating a book that was delivered to him by an angel, and it's written on gold plates." What does Charles Anton do? He immediately takes the piece of paper, rips it up, throws it in the trash, and says, "I don't want to be a part of this at all." And so Martin Harris went back and asked for another, I guess, and this is the copy of it that he was given. Or I forget how they got the copy, but the story goes that Charles Anton ripped it up and threw it in the trash and said, "I don't want to be in it. I don't want my name attached to that. I don't want to have anything to do with angels and miracles or anything." Oh, he ripped up the certificate. That's what it is. That said it was official. Yeah, okay, thank you. This is why my wife is here. I knew he ripped something up. He said, "I don't want to have my name attached to that. I don't want to be any part of this." And so we call it the Anton manuscript just to spite him. Oh, and by the way, there are 5 Mayan numerals located on this sheet. I can point them out if you'd like to know. They're right there, and right there, and right there, and right there. This one is especially seen fairly common and often on the walls in Mesoamerica. Now, that would be enough, right? But these are some cylinder seals. Now, a cylinder seal is something that was used much like a signet, a ring. It was a seal used by people to verify, but you rolled it out on clay. Seems really unnecessary, but they like to do that. Now, somebody took some cylinder seals that were found in Tlachtlico, Mexico, and they were discovered in 1966. Oh, excuse me. They were discovered in 1948 at Tlachtlico, and they were identified as belonging to the Olmec from around 1000 to 500 BC. Now, the seal is pretty interesting, but someone in the church has taken these seals, specifically the Tlachtlico, and they've cross-referenced the Anton manuscript, and you can see that here that there are matches. This cylinder seal that was found in Mesoamerica matches what Joseph Smith wrote on the Anton manuscript. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. But that's not all. There's more, folks. What is that? Well, lo and behold, I have snuck into our slide an old world cylinder seal as well. Yes, they use the same technology in both places, the New World and the Old World, the exact same invention. Now, here, for sake of time, I'm going to probably go quicker. But here is the San Bartolo Temple inscription. Murals on the walls here depict the creation and lead the initiate into a place where they are anointed and shown the mysteries of the gods. They are then seated upon an eternal throne and rule as gods themselves. You can go ahead and put 2 and 2 together. Now we go to Omni. So, Mosiah. Has anybody ever noticed that Mosiah is very similar to the word Messiah? Now, that is for a reason. It's because Mosiah is I guess it's a conjugation of sorts. It's related. Remember we talked about those roots with the 3 consonants? Well, it shares its 3 consonants with Messiah, and it's a term in ancient Hebrew. Actually, it's an ancient Hebrew word, and so it's what they call the hifo participle, and you can see that in Deuteronomy, Judges, these scriptures here. But it's a term for a king, and so Goel means redeemer or avenger of blood. Shedek means victor, savior, and this was used daily as a title for God as king, not only father. And so these are different titles that were used in the text. And it's interesting because these are all used in the Old Testament. Like I mentioned, the hifo participle appears in the Old Testament, and this specific one. And all those scriptures they're all texts that were very likely on the brass plates, which they had. So that's interesting. Here we have a stela. A stela is a large rock. Now, in Mayan, they called him Lakumtun. Why am I teaching you this, showing you this? Because I think it sounds cool, and it's fun to say. Yeah, I say it all day. Lakumtun. Lakumtun is much more fun than Stella. Sorry if you're named Stella. Maybe your parents should have named you Lakumtun. Now, this, whoops, I got ahead of myself, I guess. The Palenque Stela specifically was interesting because it was found here, and when they deciphered it, it had 96 glyphs that translated as, and it came to pass, Uchi. Now, this was done by Linda Shell, and she's an expert in deciphering Mayan hieroglyphics, and she's the one who interpreted it as, she's not the only one, but the glyph as, and then it came to pass. So, another Mayan archaeologist deciphered it as, archaeologists deciphered it as count until. That was another one that was found on there. But here's this is the actual glyph. And it's kind of fascinating. So, yeah. And sorry, Mark Twain. He is known to have said that whenever the author of the Book of Mormon, whoever that is, right, found his speech growing too modern, which was about every 2 sentences or 2, he ladled in a few such scriptural phrases as exceeding sore, and it came to pass, and made things satisfactory again. And it came to pass was his pet. If he had left that out, his Bible would have been only a pamphlet. Well, sorry, Mark. Another Lakumtun that was found is what they're calling the bearded man stela. And this could very likely be that Lakumtun that was brought to King Mosiah to interpret, because here we see, and this is the bearded man stela in La Venta, Tabasco, Mexico. And they call it the bearded man stela because this guy right here, there's a man on here, and I'm going to pull it up a little bit bigger. He's got a very unusual beard. It's this guy right here. You see, in Mesoamerica, and he's got like a very broad nose. He looks very different from this fellow. And what he's doing is he's telling a story about how his ancestors all died. And so some people believe that this is a Semitic person, a Jaredite, possibly even the last Jaredite, Coriantumr, and that this is actually the stone that was brought to King Mosiah. Some believe that this is the stone, the Lacuntum. Very well could be. Oh yeah, there's a better picture of it. It matches Egyptian inscriptions that show, and depictions of people with that pointed beard. That was pretty rare in Mesoamerica. I don't think they had pointed beards. That's just genetically not the case. And so, we found something rarer than a unicorn. It's a Guatemalan mustache. Now, in Alma 519, he uses the phrasing, the image of God's engraven upon you. Now, it was pretty common practice in Egypt for them to wear masks depicting the animal heads of the gods that they were emulating. And when they put these masks on, they actually became these gods. That was what was believed. And so that may have something to do with what Alma was trying to say at that point. And King Benjamin also could have been, condemning these practices, because they did it in Mesoamerica as well, as you can see here. He may have been condemning these practices when he said, I am but a man. Don't treat me like a god. See, the king would put on this god, the depiction of the god, the head of this animal, and become a god. And he said, don't worship me. I'm but a man. I'm not a god. Even, when you do all these things, put all these heads on yours, I guess. Well, another interesting way of saying something is Alma says that he unfolded the scriptures. Now, most of the time, I feel like we interpret this as meaning he kind of explained the scriptures, right? Well, that may be what it means, but it could also have something to do with the way that they kept records in Mesoamerica. Now, there are very few of these left. Many were burned. And Alma says that a lot were burned even before the Spaniards got there. But these are called codex, and they folded like that. They were folded. They didn't have pages that you flipped. You had to unfold the scriptures, literally. And so they didn't just have gold plates. They also had many books and many records of every kind, as Helaman tells us. So there were obviously gold records there, and there's people have written histories. When the Spaniards went to in their conquests of South America, they found gold records, but the Spanish really liked gold, so yeah, there's not any left. That's why we don't see a whole lot of gold records popping up in South America, is because they were melted down by the Spaniards. You go to the story of Ammon and how he cut all those hands off of the robbers, or the people that were trying to, scatter the king's sheep. Well, this was also apparently a very common practice in the old world. Here's an Egyptian picture of a man dropping a bag of hands in front of the king to show victory. That was one way of doing it, of kind of showing off and saying, look what we did, king, you were great, give us a raise. I've got all these hands for you. Do I know if that's related to the phrase, give him a hand? I don't know. But you can look into that. I'll leave that up to you. Here are a couple other pictures. It's on the left here is a picture. It's a depiction of the creation myth in the Popol Vuh, of the hero twins, and their enemy has cut off one of their arms and put it in a tree as kind of like a display of victory. And so they're trying to get it out of the tree. On the right is a really interesting picture somebody made of the servants of the king bringing Ammon's arm trophies back to him, saying, look what he did. I just think it's really weird how they rolled them all up and just kind of unrolled them. Maybe this is the first recorded instance of a burrito. I don't know. Next, we have the statement bloodstained swords. And this has been the bane of many people's existence, because how can you stain a sword if a sword's made of metal? Well, folks, it's because they weren't. Swords are metal in England. Swords are metal in the old world, but here in the new world, we use this thing called a makuahitl. And a makuahitl is made of wood, and it's got obsidian on both sides of it, because obsidian is ridiculously sharp. So next time you stop and say, well, how do you stain a sword? Just remember that Brother Carter showed you this wooden sword here, and that you can definitely get blood in and on your wooden sword. Another fun fact is, if you look here, they're covering themselves with the skins of beasts. Yeah, the Nephites were said to do that. The Lamanites didn't. They just had like loincloths on, and it gave them a lot of protection and the upper hand in battle, because they wore these skins. And lo and behold, Mayans did too, apparently. Now, human sacrifices in relation to the coronation of a king. It was very common practice in the Mayan civilization and the Aztec to go and take almost prisoners of war, if you will, people caught in battle, people taken in battle, who weren't killed, but who were captured fighting while they were fighting, and they would sacrifice them. Now, it was actually a rule that for someone to be a human sacrifice for the coronation of a king, they had to be taken in battle. And so we read the story about the anti-Nephi Lehis who refused to fight back, and that made them mad. That made the Lamanites very angry, because they needed to get they needed to get people for the coronation of a king. They needed to have people for sacrifices, and because the anti-Nephi Lehis refused to fight back, none of them could be taken as sacrifices. And so what did they do? They got mad, and they marched off after they killed a handful of them. They marched off to Ammonihah. And Ammonihah had just rejected Alma and all this stuff, and so they had it coming, and they were so mad that for 3 days straight, they just laid siege on Ammonihah and wiped the freaking floor with them, and just did a terrible number on Ammonihah. But it's because they were mad for having to march 3 more days to get their sacrifices. So that's kind of interesting. Next, we have this. This is called an atlatl. Now, I'm assuming the same people who were wondering, how do you stain a metal sword, were also wondering why it says they threw arrows. The arrows were thrown at them, right? At the Nephites. Well, this is how they were thrown at them. This device allowed you to kind of like holster in there a little arrow, and I guess a big arrow. That's kind of a really big arrow, and throw it. You literally threw it. Fun fact, you actually have to have a permit for one of these bad boys in Utah. Yes, the only state that you need to have a permit for an atlatl is Utah. I don't know why. Maybe they knew. Next, and I find this one of the most interesting things in the Book of Mormon, is that they have time-specific prophecies. Samuel and Alma also said this. He first declared that in 400 years, the sword of justice is going to fall on this people. And then later, if you remember, he said that within 5 years, said Samuel, within 5 years, a night will be as day, right? When do we ever hear prophets, give specific times for when things are going to happen? Hardly ever. That is so uncommon, unless you live in Mesoamerica. That's right. It was very common, and it was the way to prophesy. You see, this right here, this is it's called the Tzolk'in. And the Tzolk'in has an outer ring of 20 little glyphs, and an inner ring of 13. And it's used to kind of give your, I guess, horoscope, zodiac type thing. It's a sun sign and a galactic tone of sorts. But they used a specific calendar for prophesying. It was a separate calendar. It was a sacred calendar, and that's a tzolkin. And this tzolkin and the sacred calendar were, I guess, they were broken up into a couple of different groups and periods of times. And specifically in the Mayan culture, time was kept in portions of 400 years, 20 years, and 5 years, respectively, called Baktuns, Katuns, and Hotuns. A Baktun is 400, and a Baktun divided into 20 units is those 20 units of 20 years. Those 20-year periods are called Katuns, and then what is it? 4 Hotuns, which are each 5 years, make up a Katun. 20 Katuns makes up a Baktun, right? So, okay. So here's my point, is that you got 400 years, which is a Baktun. So you got a Baktun and a Hotun. Exactly the amounts of time that Samuel used to prophesy. He said, within 400 years, sword of justice will fall on this people, and within 5 years. That's just the way they did it. So the fact that he prophesied to them in the way that they prophesied is way too significant to overlook. It needs to be taken into consideration. Now we're coming up on the end here. This is my last slide. At least it's got good information on it. It says that there were many highways cast up. Well, as you can see here, they made their roads by stacking stones and by, I guess, just making this raised road. And so the stones were cast on top, into piles and then made flat, and that's how they made their roads. So if you go into Mesoamerica, they're all over the place. These raised roads, they're still there. I mean, you see these pictures, but there's tons of them just connecting all these different places. And so they're very interconnected. And as it says in the scripture, they led from city to city and from land to land, from place to place. And they're called sakbe. Yeah. Now, if there's one thing I want you to remember from this, all these facts are great and they support a testimony and it's wonderful, but I want you to remember that the Book of Mormon is true, and it's true whether they like it or not. So use these things to strengthen your testimony, but don't let others drag you down. There are as many reasons and proofs for the Book of Mormon, and I believe there are more, than there are against it. I'm not saying you should ignore the things that people say about the Book of Mormon that don't make sense, that people have questions about the Book of Mormon and things that are there. A lot of people wonder about the horses and the bones of horses, and the dating of those. A lot of people worry about DNA. And if you specifically are questioning your faith, that's okay. That's totally fine. In fact, you shouldn't hide from objections, and you shouldn't hide from the things that people bring up as problems with the Book of Mormon, because you have to realize something. If we really believe that the Book of Mormon is true, then we have nothing to be afraid of. Then it will stand up and there will be an answer to every question. And I believe that. I truly do. I believe that the Lord answers questions and he gives us answers so that we can have faith. And if you are struggling with your faith, I don't want you to feel down in yourself. I don't want you to feel bad about yourself. And if you want to talk to me about it and see if I can help you find some answers, I would love to. And I'd love to be able to do that and help you, as you study and learn. It's healthy to ask these questions. But remember that there are things that support and evidence that supports the Book of Mormon being an actual historical text that depicts accurately the cultures and regions that it claims to be originating from, and that there's more to the Book of Mormon than you think. And so you need to study it often. Thank you for watching this and participating if you stopped in. And I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. And have a good night.